Phil, the audio isn't coming in very well. Condition. There's no audio.
How about now?
Now you're good.
Thanks, man. Sorry. I'll review the question outside. So at the two dots, the Gemara was bothered by the fact that Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, the Mishnah in Ayin Vav Amud Beis, that he only seemed to argue in a case where the kisvu utnu, where the husband said that the writing and the giving was first, and only followed by the condition. But maybe he should also argue in all cases. And the language of the Gemara here is that perhaps we should say about Rav Yossi that get al tanai kosher, that a tanai doesn't matter in regards to a get. So to this, the Gemara says, lo, that's not correct. La'olam eimalach pasal. He would say that in a case where the condition was listed first, followed by kisvu utnu, it would still be pasal. V'shani hacha midahava le'lememar, because he should have said something else. He should have said im lo basi, then kisvu utnu. But instead, v'amar kisvu utnu im lo basi, he said it out of order. And hachi kamar, this is actually what's going on. Kisvu me'achshab utnu im lo basi. The kisvu would mean you should write it now. Utnu means im lo basi, that you should write it later after the condition has been fulfilled, that he didn't return in that time. What would the rabbis say about this? Because we know that Rav Yossi is now clarified that he only argues in the second case in the Mishnah, but not in the first. The Rabbanan, what would they say about this svara? Loshna hachi v'loshna hachi. These arguments don't matter. Both cases are problematic. If he puts the Tanai before the kisvu tnu, or if he says kisvu tnu first and then the Tanai, it does not matter. The halachos are the same in both cases. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us that if a person makes the condition of la'achar shavua after a whole Shemitah cycle, how do we view the timing on that? Does it mean that the day after year 7, that's when the condition is fulfilled? Says the Gemara, no, Shana, we have to add in yet another year. And if you look at Rashi just to our right, a third of the way down in the Rashis, Dibur HaMaschil la'achar shavua Shana, look at the end, the Kol Shana Shminis Kruya Achar Shavua. So if a person says that that you'll be divorced la'achar shavua after Shemitah, the after Shemitah includes the next year, which we might not have intuitively thought, but that is what the Gemara says. What if the person said la'achar shana? If I'm going to be gone for after a year, says the Gemara, chodesh, we have to add another month to that year. We don't assume he meant 365 days. We presume he added in the next month. Let's just say, for example, the month of January of the following year. If a person says la'achar chodesh, you're divorced after a month, then do we say day 30? No, we do not. But rather, Shabbos, we have to add in one more week. What if a person says la'achar Shabbos, we're going to be divorced after a week's time? What's the din? So here the Gemara says a third of the way down, 7 lines before the end of the parak, Ayin Zayin Amid Aleph, Yasi Reb Zera Kamed Rav Asi. Reb Zera was sitting in front of Rav Asi. But Amri, some say it was Rav Asi Kamed Rav Yochanan. Not exactly sure which generation it took place in, the second or first generation. Amar. And here was the line that was said either by Rav Asi or by Rav Yochanan, one of the two. Chad Bishva, Vitrei Vitzlasa. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, those are considered basar shabsa. those follow Shabbos. So if a person says we're going to be divorced after a week, and he says it on a Sunday, then that also means that Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday are not yet divorced days, because he said it has to be after Shabbos, and after Shabbos is up to Tuesday. But Arba v'chamsha umale Shabsa, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, that's Kame Shabsa. This din was made famous for people like us because of the halachos of Havdalah, because we know that a person can say Havdalah up to Tuesday. After that, it's no longer considered tethered to the previous Shabbos, but rather looking forward to the next one. In Tanya, we have a brisa that extends this idea to one other space, and the space that it extends it to is the holidays. The brisa writes, Tanya, 4 lines before the end of the parak, halfway down on the page, Rebbe Omer, la'achar haregel, if a person says after the holiday, so then shloshim yom, you have to wait another 30 days. That's a very strict line. It also doesn't seem to be intuitive with a regular landmark. It's just a seemingly arbitrary.
A year is a month.
Also, it's a good kasha. La'achar shavua shana nira de'afilu omi b'sof shavua. No, that's a shana. That was a great question.
Yeah, I mean, what you said, it's not. Really,
No, but your Mar
math
Makom is better. I was asking in Svara, but you're saying the Mar Makom, the math doesn't work. Yeah, great question. So the Gemara says that this shita didn't really hold up to the test of time, because Nafak Reb Chia, and when it was Darshan Mishmei de Rebbe Vikal Sua, he said out loud, "Oh, I heard this beautiful shita of Rebbe. It was wonderful." But Mishmei de Rabbim, when he spoke about the shita without a name attached to it, the Lokil Sua, right? When he wanted to be like, there's a das yachid out there that we don't paskin like Alma leis hilchas hakavase, that the halacha is not that way. Namely, if a person says la'achar haregel, based this is an inference of the Gemara. It's not actually what the Gemara says. The chora, when the chag is over, you're divorced. Whereas all of the other days had a natural divide. We know that the unit under month is week. The unit under week is day. Fine, we got it. The unit under year is month. But there is no unit under regel. So it maybe the implication is from the Gemara that you'd be divorced even right after the regel. Hadran Allah Misha'achsu Baruch Hashem. We finished yet another parak, the 7th parak of Maseches Gittin. We're going to be having a siyum in Yirtzeh Hashem in 13 days, give or take. I don't know the date. Maybe you do, somewhere around 13 days. It's on a Monday. Okay. It's more information than I had. In Yirtzeh Hashem, I'll be in town for that. Yiratzon, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. I'm excited to finish this parak for 2 reasons. First of all, because it's a hard parak. And all of the cases are so similar to one another, and my brain struggles to remember each individual case. I don't know if you're like that. I'm for sure like that. And the second reason I'm excited is because this next parak is like more classical Shas ideas that we'll see throughout Shas. For example, which we're going to discuss tonight, that a woman can be divorced by my placing a get in her chatzir. So what are the halachic mechanics of that? Is it shlichus? Is it b'nasan biyada? Is it an extension of her hand? Like that, those are shas sugyas about shlichus, and we have to understand them. Last night, somebody asked me a question about arvus by bris milah. We understand that a father can appoint someone to be a moel. That's totally normal. What happens if the father wants you to be the moel? He's Jewish, but he wants you to be the moel, but he can't read Hebrew. Can I make the bracha in his stead? Is that a din of arvus, or is that a din of shlichus? Arvus, not arvus. But why am I making a bracha for him? I can function as bezdin when there is no Jewish father, that's fine. But when wasn't the question, but when the father's present and he's saying, I can't read Hebrew, so typically I make them go word for word with me, because then my bracha is the shem chinuch, and then his bracha is the mitzvah, and then that works properly. But sometimes they're too reticent to do that. They're uncomfortable. I had this shaila come up. I don't even know the answer to this. This was a great shaila. I love this one. One of my favorite bris shailas that came up over the years. I did a bris, and my assumption from the conversations, and clearly I was wrong, is that the father was also Jewish. The mother I knew was Jewish. The father was also Jewish. So I said to the father, "Lifnei am va'eda, would you like to say the bracha after me?" He was like, "Yeah, sure." Baruch, Baruch, Ata, Ata. So I said the bracha l'shem chinuch. He's a goy, so his bracha was a 0. So should I have gone back and said another bracha? And it wasn't a bracha. It's not a bracha. It's chinuch. I do that for my kids all the time. For my 4-year-old, I make brachas from all the time. That's pashut. But what do you do? Like, let's say I remembered, and if so, what's the time frame in which you would have repeated the bracha? Do you have to be b'shas ma'isa? Does it have to be the same day in his lifetime? I don't know the answer. I never asked the question, actually. It's a great question. Okay, let's jump into a new parak. What is the name of this parak? Hazorik. Let's go. Hazorik get ishto. If a man throws a get to his wife, v'hi besoch beisa, and she is in her home, o besoch chatzera, or in her field, harei zeh megureshas. If zarkula besoch beso, if he threw it into his own house and she's there, o besoch chatzero, or in his own field, so then afilu ima bimita, even if the get is in her bed, while she's lying in a bed in his house, he's not involved here, just her in the bed, and the get is thrown into the bed that she's sleeping in, ein megureshas, because we need a halachic mechanism for the divorce to take place. When it's her chatzer, we understand her chatzer is an extension of her. We'll figure out if those are the right words or not. But over here, she's in his house right now. So if he throws the get into the guest room that she's sleeping in, and it lands on the bed, and he says goodbye and good riddance, they're not divorced yet, ein megureshas, because the bed can't be koneh for her if the bed is not hers. The bed belongs to him. However, even if she's in his property, l'soch cheka, into her lap, or l'soch kalsa, into a basket, her purse, whatever, harei zo megureshas. Good. Minahani mili, how do we know that chatzer works? So the pasuk that we know says v'nasan biada. So let's learn a brisa. The brisa is found a couple of different places in Shas, one here and one in Bava Metzia. The brisa says the Tanu Rabbanan v'nasan biada. The pasuk says in regards to a woman getting divorced that it has to be put in her hand. So if we are literalists, so then the pasuk says v'nasan biada in her hand. So perhaps we'd say that it's only in her hand. Ein li ela biada. Gaga chatzera v'karfifa minayin. How do we know that if it's thrown onto her roof, if it's thrown onto her chatzer or her karpef, which is an enclosed space, minayin? How do we know that that also works? Talmud lomar, because the pasuk says v'nasan mikol makom. It's a drasha. It's not necessarily an intuitive drasha, because we would have thought that the word v'nasan biyada wasn't left for drasha. We would have thought v'nasan biyada is the din of how to get divorced. Place this in her hand. So the Gemara says, no, the Brisa says, in the Chachamim's remarkable wisdom, that the word v'nasan was meant to be inferred from, and it teaches us mikol makom, that as long as it's in anything that's her property, she will be divorced. And we have a similar Brisa, v'tanya nami hachi gabi ganav. We have the same thing by a thief. What does that mean? The pasuk says by the ganav, it says yado. What is the pasuk? Im himatzei simatzei v'yado hageneva mishor an chamor ad sechayim shenayim yishalem. Famous pasuk that teaches us the din of kefil, that if a man is caught red-handed stealing, he has to pay double what he stole. So that's from the word yado. Ein li ela yado. I only know if he's caught with it in his hand. Gago chasev v'karfifo minayin. How do we know that if the theft took place and it's in his property, he'd still be caught? Talmud Omer himatzei simatzei mikol makom. And says the Gemara v'tzricha, we needed both of these mari mekomos. We needed this idea of gaga v'chatzera v'karfifa minayin by get, to extend that a woman can also be divorced by her chatzer. The same is true that a ganav can be chayiv kefil by his chatzer. Why do we need both cases? V'tzricha, the Gemara says 12 lines or so, 15 lines from the bottom of Ayin Zayin and Aleph. This is an obvious distinction. It's actually, honestly, it's actually a little odd that the Gemara is going into a tzrichusa here about comparing the halachic status of theft to the halachic status of a woman receiving a get. It's so easy to distinguish between those two worlds, but let's see how the Gemara makes a distinction. Get. If I only had the source that said that a woman can get divorced via chatzer, that's mishum debal korcha megarsha, because there's a unique din by a woman that a husband can divorce her against her will. Aval ganav delese bal korche, what, you can make someone steal something bal korcha? If I put a cow in your yard, that's not you being a theft, that's me being a fool. Nothing, you didn't do anything wrong. But by a woman, we can force her divorce. Therefore, these cases are not comparable. Amalo, I might have thought that maybe this rule of chatzer doesn't apply by a ganav. Kamash malan, that that's not the case. And v'yashmin and ganav. If I would have had the case of ganav that taught us that he can make a kinyan of chatzer if he wants to do geneva with his chatzer, he can. There, mishum de kanse rachmana, there he has a knas. The Torah is a chiddush. What's the chiddush? Is that he has to pay kefel, 2x. So therefore, maybe over there that's the case. I'll get a malo tzricha. So that's what the Gemara says, that we need both of these mari mekomos. All right, let's get into some lamdas over here. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. How does this work that her chatzer works? Even if it is her chatzera, who cares? Masha kansa isha kanabayla. we have a principle that which a woman owns becomes the property of her husband. And if that's true, then what is this distinction between her field and his field? Her field is his field. So what do you mean in the Brisa and in our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah presented it without Mari Makomos. The Brisa says that we know that a Chatzer can be Kona a get based on the word V'nasan Mikol Makom. But Masha Kana Isha Kana Baila. It's not even her field. So the Gemara says two answers. And here's answer number one. Amar Rebbe Lazar, it must be B'kosev La, when the husband writes to her, Dinu Dvarim Einli B'nichsayich. I want nothing to do with your properties. In other words, there's a new kimta over here. When is it that a chatzer actually works to divorce a woman? I take the piece of paper rolled up, a little string around so it stays, and I toss it over the fence into her property. Really, mashakana ishakana baila. Really, her field is my field. But ukimta, that I said dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich. I have no interest in your property. And when he says that, then the field that was initially hers properly becomes hers, and then the din of chatzar kicks in. Little difficult to say in the brisa above, by the way. The sukimta dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich. Well, the Gemara doesn't. That just bothered me in learning, but there is another answer to this. And v'chikasav lahachi my have, and even if he writes this, so what? Who cares if he writes dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich? At the end of the day, still the din of masha kana isha kana baila is stronger than his separation of what he's hoping would be the giving back of her property. She's still married to him. There's still the override. Masha kana isha kana baila. After all, the Hatanya, 6-7 lines from the bottom. Ha'omer lechavero. If a man says to his friend, "Dinu dvarim einli al sadazu ve'einli iskiba v'yadi mesulekes emena lo amar klum." All of these languages are not halachically binding. So over here too, if a man says "Dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich," I don't want anything to do with your field, and after he says that sentence, he throws the get into her field. It shouldn't matter. Your verbal declaration that which you own, I want you to own, it doesn't work because Masha Kana Isha Kana Baila is stronger than this throwaway sentence of I want you to now own your own field. So therefore, the Gemara says, you're right. You're absolutely right. And limiting the din of Chatzar tremendously, the Gemara says, Amrei Deber Rav Yanai, the Kosev La, the Oda Arusa. We're not talking about a divorce of someone who's married fully. We're only talking about the divorce of someone who's an arusa. And when you say to an arusa, dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich, I don't want your property because you're not fully married, that line does create a separation of ownership. And therefore, only as an arusa, I tell her dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich, I take the get, I throw it over the fence, then she's divorced. But the implication of this first approach is that the din of chatzar doesn't work with fully married people. And not only that, even if you were to say dinu dvarim einli b'nichsayich to a married woman, it also wouldn't work. Seems very, very limiting if you learn the Gemara this way. Seems pashut. That's just how the Gemara seems to present. Okay, and then says the Gemara, Uchadir of Kahana. We actually have precedent for this kind of idea in halacha. How so? 3 lines from the bottom. Damar of Kahana. Nachala haba'alo la'adam mimakom acher. If a man gets an inheritance from a different place, this is actually code word for a man who gets inheritance from his wife after she dies, which is not a din d'oraisa, it's a din d'rabbanan, and he can have access to that. Adam masne aleh shelo yirashena. There he can make a condition on it before Rashi adds in the last 2 letters on the page, last 2 words on the page is kodem shezacha. Before he takes possession of his wife's possessions after she died, he can say, I don't want it. He could be masne and say shelo yirashena, and this is uchade Rava. This is similar to Rava's opinion. To Amar Rava, Rava says haomer, turning to the top of Ayin Zayin of a base. A person who says efshi b'takanas chachamim kegonzu, I'm not interested in this particular takanas chachamim. Shomin lo, we do believe this person, and when is this? My kegonzu, says the Gemara kid Rav Huna Amar Rav. Do Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav yechol isha shetomar labayla. A woman can tell her husband, Eini nizones ve'eini osa, I'm not interested in being fed by you. So we know that a woman can say that, and then her maaseh yadayim don't go to him. That's reasonable. And in short, We see some precedents in halacha that one is allowed to say a line that removes their ownership. However, according to approach number one, which is the approach of Rebbe Lazar, the din of chatzer only works by an arusa when you say din udvarim ein li b'nichsayich. Rava couldn't believe that this even happened. Rava Amar, atu yadami lo kanya le'labal. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Isn't her hand already connected to her husband? Ella, it must be that Gita v'yada bayin ke'echad. Hachanami Gita v'chatzera bayin ke'echad. Rava is having trouble with the following. Doesn't the husband own her hand too? So, Masha,
Can you give her a get?
Gemara's going to figure this out. We have to figure out Rava. Rava's line is, I don't understand. Atu yada milo kanya le'labal. Doesn't he own her physical body? Doesn't he own her? There was a kinyan, there's kedushin. So everybody relax because it's not going to be the conclusion. But that's like the havamim of the Gemara.
Yeah, he knows her, yeah.
For these purposes. Yeah, but
That is what it is.
that's what it is.
Yeah, in moments away. Not a kid.
If you learn the first Mishnah in kedushin, there's room to say otherwise. But it doesn't matter because the Gemara is what?
I hear what you're saying.
I'm just saying that if we're not avoiding political correct language, it's not
No.
Yeah.
But for our purposes.
Correct. It's a yeah.
Yeah.
But so therefore, the svara of Rava is that two things happen in the same exact moment. Ela gita v'yada bayin ke'echad, just like when he hands her get, her hand returns to her own rishus. Therefore, the get is functional. Hachanami gita v'chatzera bayin ke'echad, same exact idea, which is that yes, you're right. Masha kana isha kana baila, and really the chatzer that she quote unquote owns actually belongs to him. But when he hands her the get into the chatzer, two things happen bevas achas. He gives her the get, the property transfers to her rishus, and now she's divorced. Says the Gemara, the question that we've all been thinking, that I was thinking, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, Rava, yad de isha kakashele. Rava really thought that was the case. I understand that her handiwork, that which her hand produces, you own. That I understand. But yada gufa mi kanila, you actually physically own her body? What does that mean? You own her hand? Makes no sense. Amar le Rava, you're right. What was Rava actually talking about? Yad ha'eved kakashele. He was actually talking about a different case scenario. It wasn't talking about an isha. And no, the husband doesn't own the wife's hand. What were we talking about? We were talking about the following case scenario. We're about 12 lines down. Lamanda Amar Bishtar al Yedei Atzmo. There we have the din by an Eved that according to the Shita, that I could free my Eved with a get shichror by handing him a get. So there, Yad Eved ki Yad Rabo Damya. There, the Yad Eved is like, we do own that Eved. We do. So how does that divorce take place? How does the get shecher of the Eved work? Ella, it must be that Gita v'yado bayin ke'echad, hachanami Gita v'chatzer bayin ke'echad. We're extrapolating from the world of Eved back over to the world of Isha, and we're saying that just like by an Eved, when I hand him a get shichror, two things happen at once by the world of Eved. So too by the world of Isha, two things happen at once, Rava says, and the lumdus of why a chatzer works for a woman, if it's her chatzer, is because at the very moment that he gives her the get, the property is now legally hers because of the get, and therefore there's a kinyan of the get. The actual mechanics are very, very difficult, because what's the flow of events? Is it that he gave her the get, the property became hers, and then subsequently we look back at the get? Is it really one moment in time? Or is it multiple? Is it a sequence of events? When is the actual divorce taking place? Right? Okay. It's a minor lumdus, but it requires research. Story time, quarter of the way down. There was a man who was on his deathbed. The kosav lagita ledebisu, he wrote a get to his wife, behade panya demale shabsa, late on Friday afternoon, but velo he speak lemeisvala, he didn't succeed in finishing to write it and giving it to her. He wrote it actually, but he didn't give it to her. Lemachar, the next day, takaf le alma, his world almost left him. In other words, he was about to die. And he didn't want there to be yibum. He didn't want there to be all of the nafkaminas that not having a get would have. So the husband wanted to come up with a solution. The problem is that the get is muksa. Okay. So says the Gemara. Where's that Rashi? Rashi, halfway down. Dibra Hamaskel Tokaf le'alma, v'haya yare pen yamus v'tizkak liyavam. He was afraid, the husband was afraid that he was going to die. They had no children, and she would end up marrying his brother, which maybe nobody wanted. But v'aser l'taltel get b'Shabbos of the Mosrela. You're not allowed to give a get on Shabbos. So let's go back in the Gemara. Then they had a shaila of a din derabanan of muktzah to avoid the deoraisa situation of yibum. I'm surprised by the question. No? Anybody?
No, I mean, may not be desirable, that's what we have to lay down, so to avoid it, I mean, what's the problem?
Oh. You're right. I was weighing the questions. The scenario that will result is a massive nafkamina. It's a huge nafkamina. Would we not allow for a get to be employed? Would we not allow, let me ask the question the right way. Would we not allow for the Isser Derabanan of Muktzah to be violated in order to avoid a scenario of Yibum? That's the right way to ask the question. So clearly the Gemara has answered it. So the Gemara says it's Muktzah. Also the Kame de Rava. So then they went to Rava and they asked the Shaila, what should we do? He's about to die. But the property, the get is in a particular property and it's not in her property. So says the Gemara, Amar Lahu, they said, Zilu Amrule, go tell the man who's dying, Likne Nehala, you should acquire to her, Lahu Duchta, the Yossi Begita, you should acquire the room in which the get is sitting, Vitezel Ihi, she should go there, Vitechud, she should close the door, Vitiftach, and then open the door, Vitachzik Bey, and then she will then have a kinyan over that room. So let's say that he had it in his guest bedroom. That's where the get was sitting, and he's about to die. So they said to her, go to the guest bedroom. He says to her, you can be kona that room. She goes to that room, closes and opens the door. Voila, she opens the property. She's automatically divorced. Okay. Why is this Isser Derabanan better than Muktzah? You just made a kinyan, making a kinyan on Shabbos. So what's the difference?
What is the Isser on?
You made a kinyan.
What's the Isser on
Muktzah?
Probably the same thing, no?
But the Rashi calls it Muktzah.
Muktzah vid.
What?
Well, your opinion was exactly also the Talta get b'Shabbos ula mosro. Say ula mosro is part of the Talta or what?
Maybe it's two.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just like you can't get married on Shabbos because it's a kinyan, which is midrabanan.
But what's the Masira that's usher? What?
Giving her the get, which is her being kona herself.
Why is it get Muktzah?
Why? I'm assuming because of the fact that you can't give it. You can't give it as a function.
Okay. So
why otherwise would you get it?
Okay, yeah. So we're assuming that it's usher. It's like, the frozen chicken in the freezer. It's muktzah because there's like just a zero. So therefore, there's an Isser Tiltal, and as you're pointing out from Rashi, the extra vav there, there's an Isser Tiltal, and there's an Isser of Masira of making a kinyan. But then aren't you still making a kinyan, even if a roundabout way and closing the door?
Why is it any better?
Why is it any better?
Good one.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Ditznan, where's precedent for this in halacha that we see that this odd form of kinyan even functions as a kinyan? Says the Gemara, a third of the way down on Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, No'al Godar Paratz Kolshu Arezo Chazaka. So we see some precedent that this odd form of kinyan will work, and in a case of a shchiv meira who's about to die, the get is in his property. He can verbally tell her, you're allowed to acquire this room in which the get sits, make a kinyan by opening, closing the door, doing some sprach, some little something, and that actually counts. Maybe the difference is that the maisa you're doing is not a maisa of Isser, even though halachically you are making a kinyan, but you're not doing a maisa of Isser. Masha'en came by picking up the get, you're actually violating muktzah. You're not touching anything muktzah. You're touching a door. A door is not muktzah. A door is mechuber l'karka. You're making a kinyan. So that, but if what I just said is correct, then we have a hierarchy of which Isser derabanan to violate.
Say if I'm somehow allowing get, it's no more muktzah. Chicken is only muktzah because what are you gonna do with frozen chicken? But if there is a function for it.
Right, not all frozen food in our house. We've discussed this. The peas, yeah,
In everybody's house.
yeah, exactly.
Which, by the way, they can just be frosted.
They're disgusting. They should be muksa for other reasons. Yeah. Not an unacceptable vegetable. Yeah.
You also to buy land in stone shops.
Correct. Correct.
So you're also allowed to be acting about buying.
But that's Amir La'akum. That's Amir La'akum. That was a din d'Rabbanan. That's
But you're also making a kinyan.
but it's the tzorech mitzvah. There's like a grander. By the way, this is also the tzorech mitzvah. Just highlighting.
The kinyan is also.
What kinyan?
Any kinyan.
Oh. Yeah. Because you might rather, yeah. But the result is doraisa, meaning the Isser derabanan of you're correct, but the mechanics are derabanan. We're concerned about the kinyan is a functional kinyan doraisa. The restriction is the restriction of the kinyan is because of the Isser derabanan. So I'm not sure what the lamda says here. It could be what you're saying. It could be that, or it could be like that. I'm suggesting that maybe we're choosing which Isser derabanan to violate because
it seems like it, maybe because it doesn't look like it.
Could be.
Opening and closing.
Even though you made a kinyan, they're both Isurei derabanan, but one of them isn't inherent. Well, it's mechubar lekarka. There's no muksa.
But it doesn't look like it.
Correct. But Masha'en Kain, if I were to walk into that room and take the get and hand it to her, I just violated muksa biyadayim.
That's
It's a lumdus. It's a fair svar. Okay, third of the way down. Let's continue. Amar le Rav Elish le Rava. Wait 1 second. How does any of this work? Masha kansa isha kanabaila. Here we go again. You just said that the shchib meira should tell the wife, go acquire the second bedroom. The problem is that she's still married. What was Rava's whole svara? There are two things that are bayin ke'echad. So Rava was pushed back and he was ichsef, he was embarrassed. They caught him red-handed that he was wrong. His svara is wrong. L'sof, it ended up turning out that this woman, who was the wife of the shchimera, wasn't a full wife. Iglai milsa de arusa havoy, and therefore, in that case, it was reasonable to allow for this to happen. And then Amar Rava was a little contrite, but he said, "Im amru b'nesua." If we say the principle of masha kansa isha kanabayla b'nesua, yomru be'arusa, reasonable to say that it would not apply by an arusa. And then Hadar Amar Rava then strengthened himself up and came up with another opinion. Actually, you know what? I'm going back to what I said before. Loshna arusa v'loshna nesua. Gita v'chatzera abayin ke'echad. So even Rava was a little unsettled with his own idea. And by the way, maybe that's why Rebbe Lazar on the first page didn't engage this possibility. Yeah, he stuck with his answer, a very limited answer that Chatzar only works by an arusa. But Rava struggled with his own idea that Gita v'chatzera are bayin ke'echad. However, the conclusion is that from this story that Rava again held his ground and said Gita v'chatzera bayin ke'echad. So says the Gemara, why do we have Rava saying the same thing twice? We had it at the top of the page, and we have it over here. We had it when he argued with Rabbi Lazar on the top of the page, and we have it by the Maisa. He already said it already. So says the Gemara, you're right, but ki amra Rava ahoy Maisa amra. They were repeating it as part of the story with the Shchiv Meira. It wasn't like he gave another shiur, and he gave one shiur. It's not like us. We repeat the same things 100 times in shiur. The Rav can give a drasha 3 weeks apart, same Mar Makomos. Only a few people will notice, There, everybody knew what was going on. You couldn't give the same shiur twice. And he wouldn't give the same shiur. It wasn't a shiur. This time it was a bididi hava uvda type of story. The Rav said, no, I'm just telling you what happened. And Lamaisa, we have a machlokas in Rabbi Lazar and Rava in regards to the lamdos of how chatzar works. Does chatzar work only be'arusa? Or does chatzar work because Gita v'chatzera are bayin ke'echad? We had said in our Mishnah that, this is explicit, our Mishnah said black on white that she needed to be in the house when it took place. And in fact, this is not so simple. It's actually a machlokas. We are now a little more than halfway down. If he throws the get into her property, she needs to be present for that. Rav Oshia Amar, I disagree entirely. Even if they're in different cities, or it doesn't matter. So the Gemara asks on the Shita Rav Oshia, how in the world can you say that? Did you look at our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says the language, quote, how can you say she doesn't have to be there? So says the Gemara, Vihi kimisha b'soch chatzera. To cave on, here's the lamdas, to cave on the chatzer mishtameres l'daita. Since it's the chatzer is mishtameres, basically, she's going to want the things that are in her field. Has it watched, it's protected, it has a fence. Then the Gemara says, miskareshes. So maybe the language of Hivisoch Besa is not meant to be literal in our Mishnah. That's what Rav Oshia reads, and it's just conceptual. It's just that it has to be a field that's mishtameres. Lema says the Gemara, Lema b'hakamiflagi. This Gemara has been quoted many times throughout Shas. I'm sure we've come across it before. The Gemara says as follows, no. Perhaps Lema b'hakamiflagi, maybe the machlokas of Ula and Rav Oshia as to whether or not she actually must be present when the get is put in. Perhaps it's because the marsavar chatzer mishum yada israbai, that maybe the way that chatzer works is because of yad. It's as though it's equivalent to her hand, and that's why it would work. Umar savar chatzer mishum shlichus israbai, and another shita holds that it's not because of yad, it's because of shlichus. If it's because of yad, she should be there. If it's because of shlichus, no need to be there. Says the Gemara, lo, I disagree. The kule alma, everyone agrees, chatzer mishum yada israbai. Everyone agrees that chatzer is because of yad. But Mar savar ki yada, Mar says that there's an equivalence between her hand and the realities of her accepting the get. What's that? Ma yada bismucha, av chatzera bismucha. Just like, generally speaking, a person's hand is close to their body, so too, they need to be close to their chatzer. If the chatzer is like her yad, and her yad is attached to her hand, then she needs to be near her chatzer when the get is being given. That's a shita of Ula. And ve'idach, what would Rav Oshaya say back to that? That's ridiculous. Ma yadcha bidvuka, just like her hand is literally attached to her body, would you then say, av chatzera bidvuka, we have to sew her and stitch her to the ground? That's ridiculous. Obviously, the Gemara's comparison of yad doesn't mean that it's attached to her body. That's crazy. Ella ki yada, there's another comparison of yad. Says Rav Oshaya, that would be a reasonable svara. Ma yada mishtameres l'daita, av chatzera ha-mishtameres l'daita. Just like her hand, she gets to choose what goes into her hand. Her field too. La'afuke chatzer mishtameres shelo midaita. Perhaps something will go in her field that she doesn't want to go in there. Then the Gemara tells a story. 12 lines from the bottom. This story will take us to the top of the page at the 2 dots, and then we'll stop. Hahu Gavra, there was a man. The Zarak la Gita le debisu. He threw a get to his wife. Have a kaima bechatzer, and it was in the chatzer. Ozal Gita, when the get went in, nafal befisla. It fell, says the Gemara, onto a block of wood. Says the Gemara, Amar of Yosef, Chazinan, we need to check. Ihavya arba amos al arba amos. We need to check if that is its own Rishus HaYachid within a Rishus HaYachid. And if that's the case, then Palag la Rishus HaLanafshe. If that's the case, that the block of wood is 4 by 4, that's a 6 foot by 6 foot block, so then that's its own Rishus. Done. That doesn't even count. And then says the Gemara, V'ilo, and if it didn't go there, then Chada Rishus, if it fell on the ground, it fell on a piece of wood that's smaller than Dalad al Dalad, then they are divorced. Says the Gemara, B'maya Skinan. What case are we dealing with over here? If we're talking about her chatzer, ki have dalad amos, my have. Who cares about the dalad amos if it's her backyard? It's all her stuff. Even if the block of wood is 4 by 4, it's all her stuff. Ella, it must be bechatzer didei that we're talking about. It's in his chatzer. She's standing there and it lands on a block of wood. And says the Gemara there too. Ki lo have arba amos, my have. Who cares? Even if there was no piece of wood, even if it hit her when he threw it and it landed next to her, she still wouldn't be divorced because it's his field. It's his backyard. Lo tzricha, it must be, says the Gemara, to oshla makom. He rented a spot for her. And says the Gemara, dechad makom mushle inshi. It's typical for a person to rent part of their backyard, but tre makomos lo mushle inshi. And therefore, there's a nafkamina if it falls on that other property, if it falls on the piece of wood. And let's qualify this. V'lo amar, and when is this true? Elo de lo gvoa asara. It can't be above 10 tvachim because we know that above 10 tvachim is no longer down here; it's considered up there. Aval gvoa asara afal gav de lo have arba amos. Even if it landed on a thin pedestal, but above 10 tvachim, which is only 40 inches, it's not so much. Under those circumstances, that would not work. And as well, V'lo Amran, last line of Ayin Zayin Amid V'lo Amran Ella Delesle, turning to the top of Ayin Ches, Amanav Delesle Shem Levai. If it didn't have a unique name to it, Aval Isle Shem Levai, Afal Gav Delo Gva Sara, Be'afal Gav Delo Have Arba Amos. There would be a different din if it landed on a Shem Levai, even if it wasn't 10 Tvachim, and even if it wasn't Arba Amos. So just a couple of dinim over here. It must be that we were talking in this case where he threw her the get and it landed on a block. It must be that we're talking about his field, because if it was her field, it wouldn't have mattered where it landed. We'll stop right here, and Emir Hashem will pick up tomorrow on the top of Ayin Ches and Aleph, 3 lines down. Wishing you all a beautiful night.